Hi, friends. I've been asked to speak about net zero and fossil fuel divestment. And I'm going to start with this passage from Matthew 6:21, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. A reminder that our spiritual treasures are so much more valuable than our worldly treasures. This passage is also a reminder that how we use or spend or invest our worldly treasures is an expression of our spiritual values, because where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. We United Methodists have a heart for God's creation, for environmental justice, for climate justice. I'm convinced of it, even though a lot of its words, social principles, book of resolutions, but there's a lot of action that's been taking place over all these years as well. And one of the most important actions was taken just a few years ago by our general agencies and the Council of Bishops to commit to reducing greenhouse gas emissions that cause climate change. We know that has to be done. And they agreed to limit emissions all the way down to net zero by 2050. That was what was being asked with the global movement toward net zero. Big commitment. And to work for a net zero global economy by 2050. That was also part of their pledge. And yet, we United Methodists, as individuals and as our institutions, are still invested in fossil fuels, the primary driver of climate change, despite the fact that we are well aware of the horrors of climate disruption, of the damage being done to God's creation, the harm to our human family, to vulnerable groups of people, to our children, to future generations. We know all that. And yet we are still investing in fossil fuel companies. That's not consistent with our values. We need to invest rather in goods and services that can move us in the direction of a just transition toward a clean energy future. And part of that means divesting from fossil fuels. We need to do that in order to reinvest. And so today I'm going to be talking about net zero and what that is all about in the context of where we are today with climate change. And also, I'm going to be talking about divestment as an honest effort and an honest action, a next step toward reducing emissions, which is the whole point of net zero. So where are we with climate change and net zero? The movement toward net zero began about 10 years ago, along about the same time as the Paris Agreement was signed. That was the agreement where we made the point, and the people who were there made the point, that we needed to limit greenhouse gas emissions and to take the temperature down, keep it limited to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times. That was the limit that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change was recommending, IPCC, that would be a place where we could stabilize the climate, prevent some of the feedback loops and tipping points and the climate chaos that would result if we just kept going up. Limit it, stabilize the climate at 1.5 degrees Celsius. And the nations of the world agreed to that limit. The IPCC also had a pathway to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that pathway was start reducing emissions then and go down, keep going down until 2030, you should have reached 45% reduction. And by 2050, you should have reached net zero. And that would take us to 1.5 degrees Celsius and would let us stay there. Well, what's happened with that idea? We didn't start going down. Instead, we started going up with greenhouse gas emissions as well as temperature. And now we're headed toward a world of 3 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. That's where we are. We have to face it. We have to face where we are with climate change at this time. And we are really getting close to that limit. And in fact, the past 18 of the past 19 months, global temperatures have averaged at least 1.5 degrees Celsius. And scientists are shocked. They were even more shocked in January of this year, just last month, when they and they averaged 1.75 degrees Celsius. Temperatures have spiked in the past couple of years. So what does that mean? It doesn't mean that we're sure that we are already at 1.5 degrees Celsius. That isn't what it means, because that would be measured in a decade. It would take a decade for us to know that for sure. The temperatures fluctuate. It doesn't mean that we stop taking action. If anything, we have to double down on the action, because every fraction of a degree matters. It's not like a cliff that you fall off of. It's more gradual than that. But we need to certainly reduce greenhouse gas emissions sooner rather than later. And what science is saying we need to do in order to do that is phase out fossil fuels, not just continue to create renewables to subsidize fossil fuels, but to exchange them for fossil fuels. And we can do it. There is a clean energy revolution underway that is very powerful, with prices and availability and all the good qualities that can move us into a clean energy future. It's the will to do it, and that's where we come in. We need to divest from fossil fuels. It's a way for us to phase out fossil fuels from our own investments. It's one thing that we can do. It helps us reduce emissions. Science says phase out fossil fuels. We phase out our fossil fuel investments. And really, that's no small thing, because as individuals, as churches, as annual conferences, as agencies, the largest part of our greenhouse gas emissions, more than from our lifestyles or from our buildings, is probably our investments in fossil fuel companies. Because they can use the money that we invest many times over. You know, that's how banks work and credit works. So what we invest in, there's a lot of money that we're investing in fossil fuels as United Methodists. And what are they doing with the money that we are giving them, investing in them? They are building very durable infrastructure that will last for decades and keep the fossil fuel party going. They are investing in, what do they call it? They call it an alternative unconventional extraction technologies like fracking and tar sands and offshore oil drilling, which have the big rigs way up high because they know that the seas are rising. What do they invest in? They invest in refineries for plastics because they're hoping that if there's a waning interest in coal, oil, and gas, plastics will fill some of that gap. And so plastics are expected to triple by 2050, which just sounds like a hell on earth to me. We need to not be investing in these fossil fuel companies that are also influencing politics, dominating public energy policy and climate policy, fostering doubt about climate change or whether we can do it with clean energy. There are many reasons why we should not be investing in fossil fuel companies, because we want to be able to withdraw our investments and let them know and let the world know that we do not support this, that we no longer are providing moral cover to them by our engagement and our money, that we are not going to fund the fossil fuel companies, that we are not going to profit and share profits with them because it's against our values. And in the words of the fossil fuel divestment movement, the secular argument, the secular moral argument, it is wrong to profit from wrecking the planet. In the context of a world blowing past 1.5 degrees Celsius, the limit that we were trying to set, and that was set, by blowing past that deadline, 2050 as a deadline is completely inadequate by blowing past that limit. We need to reduce emissions. That's the whole point of net zero. Reduce emissions sooner rather than later. And divesting from fossil fuels is an honest step toward practicing what we preach, practicing what we have been calling our church to for almost 50 years. It's a way to walk our talk about climate change. Because as Jesus said, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also.